When your own father's comrade in arms ends up in an interrogation room, you know something's gone catastrophically wrong at the top. And that's exactly where China finds itself right now. The Chinese Communist Party just purged General Zhang Youxia, the country's highest-ranking military officer below Xi Jinping himself. And if you think this is just another routine corruption cleanup, you haven't been paying attention. This is a five-alarm fire inside the world's largest military, and the smoke signals are terrifying. Before we dive into what this all means, smash that like button and subscribe, because we're about to unpack one of the most dangerous political earthquakes happening right now, something the mainstream media is barely scratching the surface on. Let's start with who Zhang Youxia actually was, because this isn't just some random general getting fired. Zhang was Xi Jinping's revolutionary comrade. Their fathers fought side by side in the Communist Revolution that brought Mao to power back in 1949. In Chinese politics, that kind of revolutionary bloodline connection is supposed to make you untouchable. It's like political armor that's passed down through generations. Zhang and Xi knew each other since they were kids. They grew up in the same elite circles. Xi personally selected Zhang as vice chairman of the Central Military Commission back in 2017, and then broke retirement rules to keep him in that position in 2022. This was Xi's guy, his most trusted military ally. The man he relied on to control 2 million People's Liberation Army personnel. And on January 24, 2026, the Ministry of National Defense announced that Zhang Youxia and Chief of Staff Liu Zhenli were under investigation for serious violations of discipline and law. That's regime code for you're going down. The official charges include accusations that Zhang sold nuclear secrets to the United States, severe disciplinary violations, and corrupting the military's political ecology. Now, if that nuclear secrets allegation sounds familiar, that's because it's a classic authoritarian playbook move. Mao Zedong used fabricated spy charges to eliminate Lin Biao, his designated successor, who got too powerful. Kim Il-sung in North Korea deployed the same tactic against Park Han-young. She is now recycling this tried and tested method against someone who should have been protected by the strongest possible connections. But here's where it gets really interesting. The real conflict wasn't about espionage. Sources close to the situation say Zhang and Xi have been locked in what they're calling a bloody battle of mutual purges since 2022 over something called the 7-up, 8-down retirement rule. That's the informal policy where officials retire at 67 but can stay if they're 68. Sounds bureaucratic and boring until you realize this triggered a power struggle so intense that she bypassed normal party procedures and launched immediate criminal investigations. When you're arresting your father's comrade-in-arms without following standard protocol, you're either facing an existential threat or creating one through paranoia. Possibly both. And Zhang isn't the only one. She has personally selected 6 Central Military Commission members back in November 2022. He's now purged 5 of them. 5 out of 6. Think about that for a second. This isn't house cleaning. This is gutting the entire command structure. The first wave hit in 2023 when the Rocket Force, the branch that controls China's nuclear missiles, got decimated. The second wave in 2025 targeted the political leadership and vice chairman He Weidong. Now Zhang and Liu represent Wave 3, and there's no sign this is stopping. The Pentagon has been watching this unfold with serious concern, and honestly, they should be. Because there's a historical parallel here that should terrify everyone. In the 1930s, Joseph Stalin conducted the Great Purge of the Soviet military. He executed 35,000 experienced officers, replacing them with loyal but incompetent yes-men who wouldn't question his authority. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the Red Army's decimated leadership contributed to catastrophic early defeats. Stalin had prioritized loyalty over competence and paid a terrible price in blood. Millions of Soviet soldiers died in those first years partly because the officer corps didn't have the experience or expertise to execute effective defensive operations. Xi Jinping appears to be making the exact same mistake. And China's military readiness was already questionable before these purges even began. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside the People's Liberation Army, because the corruption problems go way deeper than just generals taking bribes. Reports from defectors and intelligence sources paint a disturbing picture. U.S. intelligence assessments from 2023 suggested that some liquid-fueled missiles in the PLA rocket force were filled with water instead of fuel. Water, not rocket fuel. Water. Additionally, the massive new intercontinental ballistic missile silo fields in Xinjiang, which China spent billions constructing, have defective silo doors that won't open properly. If that's true, it means China's nuclear deterrent, the thing that's supposed to prevent anyone from attacking them, might not even work when they need it. These aren't minor technical glitches. These are catastrophic failures that suggest corruption has compromised fundamental military capabilities. And it gets worse. High failure rates for exported Chinese fighter jets and tanks have been documented. Systemic corruption throughout the supply chain means equipment maintenance gets neglected because officials pocket the funds. Former PLA Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Yao Chang, who defected to the United States in 2016, explained that corruption is driven by inadequate budgets. Military departments with no money allocate funds from equipment budgets for things like dinners and gifts. He literally said when he was in the military, they used missile fuel to make hot pot. Let that sink in. They were burning rocket fuel for cooking because the money that should have gone to proper supplies got embezzled somewhere up the chain. That's not a military. That's a Potemkin village with nuclear weapons. Now here's the strategic nightmare scenario. If Xi chooses war with Taiwan to distract from domestic problems, he may discover too late that his military can't execute the mission. A one-sided defeat against combined U.S., Japanese, and Taiwanese forces becomes a real possibility when your weapons don't work and your experienced commanders are in prison. The irony is brutal. Xi's purges designed to ensure loyalty may guarantee military failure. The chaos in the high command has real-time operational impacts. The Eastern Theater Command, which has primary responsibility for any Taiwan invasion, and the Joint Staff Department, which would control critical national-level assets, have both lost their top leadership. Those generals are gone. The institutional knowledge is gone. The operational planning is disrupted. And this is happening while Xi is supposedly preparing the PLA to be ready for major combat operations by 2027. But Xi's purges aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening against the backdrop of an economic crisis that's spiraling beyond control. Let's connect these dots because understanding the economic pressure explains why the military purge is so dangerous. China's youth unemployment has reached catastrophic levels. The official rate hit 18.9% in August 2025, and that's using a new methodology that excludes students from the calculation. The real number is probably higher, between 25 and 40% of young people, depending on how you measure it. An entire generation faces no economic future. These aren't just statistics. These are millions of university graduates who studied hard, followed the rules, and discovered there are no jobs waiting for them. The real estate crisis threatens 30% of China's gross domestic product. The property sector that drove decades of growth has collapsed, taking middle-class wealth with it. Companies like China Vanke and Evergrande, which we've covered extensively on this channel, defaulted on hundreds of billions of dollars in debt. Home prices in major cities have stagnated or fallen. Chinese families who poured their life savings into real estate as an investment have watched their wealth evaporate. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. In Chinese culture, property ownership is tied to marriage prospects, social status, and retirement security. When the property market collapses, it's not just an economic crisis. It's a social crisis. Local government debt has become unsustainable. Some 62% of newly issued bonds just pay interest on old debt. Provinces are functionally bankrupt. They can't provide basic services. They can't pay government employees on time. The infrastructure investment that once absorbed excess labor and hid unemployment through make-work projects has run dry. China built entire ghost cities that no one lives in. High-speed rail lines that lose money every single day. Bridges to nowhere. And there's nowhere left to hide unemployment through these wasteful construction projects. The World Bank projects China's GDP growth will moderate to 4.5% in 2026, down from 5% in 2025. And those are official numbers, which everyone knows are inflated. Real growth is probably lower. As the middle layer of Chinese society collapses, dissatisfaction concentrates in the only institution capable of physically challenging Chinese Communist Party rule: the military. And that's what makes the Zhang Youxia purge so dangerous. It's both a symptom of instability and a catalyst for more. Think about the logic from the perspective of a mid-ranking PLA officer watching this unfold. You've spent your career serving the party. You followed orders. You stayed loyal. And now you're watching the most senior generals, people with revolutionary credentials and personal connections to Xi, getting arrested and disappeared. What message does that send? It tells you that no one is safe. That loyalty doesn't protect you. That competence doesn't matter. All that matters is whether she perceives you as a threat. This creates predictable dynamics that destabilize authoritarian regimes. First, loyalty replaces competence in leadership selection. Xi needs people who will never question him, even if they're terrible at their jobs. Second, fear prevents honest reporting to top leadership. Officers tell Xi what he wants to hear rather than what he needs to hear. Third, bad decisions multiply because yes-men won't challenge authority. Fourth, internal opposition grows among purged officers' allies who now have reason to resist. And fifth, external enemies sense weakness and probe for vulnerabilities. China is entering this cascade right now. Xi's purges create the very instability they're meant to prevent. And while all this is happening internally, external pressure is compounding the crisis. The United States has successfully squeezed China's energy lifelines. In Venezuela, U.S. pressure has disrupted Chinese oil access from Latin America. In Iran, sanctions enforcement limits Beijing's energy options in the Middle East. China imports roughly 70% of its oil. It's heavily dependent on stable energy flows to keep its economy running. If those supplies get interrupted or become more expensive, it hammers an already struggling economy. She faces a multi-front existential crisis. Economic collapse at home. Energy strangulation abroad. Military leadership in chaos. And a ticking demographic time bomb as China's population ages faster than almost any society in history. So what are Xi's options? None of them are good. Option 1, do nothing. Watch economic deterioration fuel social unrest that eventually threatens Communist Party control. Risk military coup from generals who see regime collapse coming and decide they need to act. Option 2, attempt Taiwan invasion. Gamble that a quick victory would restore domestic support and prove military capability. But with a gutted officer corps and broken equipment, defeat becomes likely, which would trigger the regime collapse Xi fears. Option 3, gradual reform. acknowledge failures, and implement economic changes. But this requires admitting mistakes, which Xi's personality cult makes impossible without losing face and authority. None of these paths lead anywhere good. And this is why U.S. strategists are increasingly concerned about miscalculation. A desperate Xi might attempt Taiwan despite poor odds, triggering a war nobody wants. The mess in the PLA may have taken some of the shine off Chinese confidence, but Xi still has powerful weapons he can deploy. Rare earth elements. China controls roughly 70% of global rare earth production and 90% of processing. These materials are essential for everything from smartphones to military systems. If Trump pushes Xi too hard on trade, rare earths become a weapon. Additionally, Xi has shown repeatedly that he's willing to stare down external pressure even when his domestic position looks fragile. During the escalating U.S.-China trade war from April to October 2025, Xi chose confrontation over compromise multiple times. The question isn't whether Xi's approach is sustainable. It isn't. The question is how the inevitable crisis manifests. Does the Chinese Communist Party collapse internally through coup or popular uprising? Does China lash out militarily in desperation? Does the regime gradually lose control as provinces effectively become autonomous? Each scenario creates different challenges for the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. What's certain is that China's stability and Xi's grip on power is far more fragile than Beijing's propaganda suggests. The Zhang Youxia purge is a symptom of that fragility. When you're executing your father's comrades, you're not governing from strength. You're barely hanging on. And when a nuclear-armed great power with 2 million troops and the world's second-largest economy is barely hanging on, everyone should be paying attention. The purges reveal a leader who understands the threats but has chosen the wrong response. Instead of addressing root causes like economic stagnation, systemic corruption, and loss of middle-class confidence, he's doubling down on control through fear. That strategy has a historical track record. It works until suddenly it doesn't. The Soviet Union looked invincible until it collapsed in a matter of months. The Shah of Iran seemed secure until revolution swept him away. Authoritarian regimes can appear stable right up until the moment they're not. For those of us watching from the outside, the implications are profound. A China in crisis is unpredictable. Military purges combined with economic collapse create conditions where rational decision-making breaks down. Leaders under pressure make desperate choices. And when those leaders control nuclear weapons and the world's largest standing army, their desperate choices affect all of us. The coming months will be critical. Watch for additional purges extending into the middle ranks of the PLA. Watch for changes in China's military exercises around Taiwan. Watch for shifts in diplomatic posture that might signal Xi is preparing domestic audiences for conflict. And watch for signs of internal resistance, which could range from subtle bureaucratic obstruction to open challenges to Xi's authority. The mainstream media is treating this as just another corruption scandal, but it's so much more than that. This is a regime on the edge, trying to maintain control through fear while the foundations crumble beneath it. The question isn't if something breaks. The question is when and how catastrophic the consequences will be. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure you're subscribed because we'll be tracking this situation closely as it develops. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss updates. And share this video with anyone who needs to understand what's really happening inside China right now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.